Oh hey, it's me. My last brain cell. This took me almost 5 months to make. Moment of silence for the brain cells who have moved on to better employment opportunities. Okay, let's go. This is a costume I designed once intended for use in a musical set during the mid-18th century in Western Europe. Contextually, it's the wearer's first time in a silken gown, and she is hyper-aware that she doesn't fit in amongst her new peers. For this reason, the dress is made of a silk shantung, a sort of visual fusion between the flawless silk taffeta and slubbed silk dupioni. From afar, the fabric is as crisp as water, but upon closer inspection, it's peppered with subtle imperfections. Using the mid-Georgian silhouette as my base, I strove for an almost suffocating amount of coverage. Really, the only visible part of the body is the face. A young woman with a low neckline during this time period wasn't really scandalized the way it is now, so it's not a modesty bid, although you could certainly read it as one as a modern viewer. The real reasons are that this character's opposite never wears this much coverage, and as a disguised person, you wouldn't want to take any unnecessary opportunities to reveal your identity as an imposter. Design-wise, this has gone through several rounds of revisions. When I first designed this dress, it was during my first semester of college 3 years ago, and I knew next to nothing about period fashion. So here's my Rococo dress looking suspiciously 1860s? Nice. As I started studying art history and costume design in college, as one does, I became laser focused on this Rococo aesthetic. This gown is leading a little early in that Rococo era. It's a little more downplayed than what probably comes to mind when you think of Rococo aristocracy. This does not look like a Versailles dress, and that's something you can gauge by the costume's monochromatic downplaying of the period typical floral motif. There is a dress in the show that is quite the opposite of this one. It has that characteristic grand pannier and the crazy floral, colorful brocade. Overall, I tried to make this feel like it had a solid foothold in history. I wanted to make it feel like any modern whimsy was coming to the period fashion, rather than the period fashion influencing a modern design, if that makes sense. Okay, nevertheless, this is the Princess in Disguise dress. Enjoy. This gown is a robe à l'anglaise with customized petticoats and bum roll over top a pair of 1750s stays. I made the pattern for the bum roll first. I knew I wanted to give it lots of fluff to give this dress a regal look, and I know that layering petticoats is heavy. I was nervous that my pocket hoops would droop or warp under the weight of the skirts, so I wanted to have a bum roll that was large enough to sculpt the silhouette by itself. I call this the big booty bum roll. I was set on building the structure because I didn't want that sharp-edged, pristine, caged look of the pocket hoops. I preferred that sloping silhouette that you see more in the earlier part of the century. Over top of the bum roll, I have 2 identical petticoats with a ruffled hem. The skirts are 2 large rectangles with slits at the top of the side seams for pocket access. The ruffles use so much fabric, but it gives the whole thing a nice bounce. Overall, the bum roll and the petticoats guzzled about 12 yards of cotton fabric. But oh, we've just begun fabric guzzling. It's about to get way more expensive, unfortunately for me. It's worth mentioning that when I made the Hamilton dresses, it was fairly simple to pattern out pieces since there were ample photos that alluded to the construction of the dresses. This, however, is being built off an illustration, and while it is my illustration, there are still some ambiguities and guesswork in trying to make all the pieces come together to make a dress that essentially looks like a drawing. When I ordered the fabric based on the swatch, I was expecting more of a periwinkle blue, which is what I envisioned, but I ended up with more of a wisteria purple. I didn't notice this until I started sewing and compared a swatch to the fabric. Oof. Now, I advise you watch your head and step as we move up into the frustration station portion of this project. This is the part where I watched the entirety of Outlander over the course of 2 months and was still in this phase of the project when it ended. To make it brief, I made the bodice of this dress 3 times in the fashion fabric before getting it right, which is very bad for several reasons I'm sure you can think up, but the bottom line is I paid for my hubris in time, in money, and in Outlander. I thought since I'd made a few robe à l'anglaise dresses before, I could wing it with this one, but there was just problem after problem with this construction, which could have been smoothed over with a mock-up, but alas, a lazy toad pays for her mistakes. Bodice 1 failed because I had initially wanted to embroider all the flowers on this dress. I started doing this by hand since I don't have an embroidery machine, but it took so much time and the fabric buckled constantly no matter how much tension I used or didn't use. Ultimately, I painted all the flowers on. There are a couple of hand-painted 18th century dresses, but not like this. I'm licking my wounds here. Instead of freehanding the painting, I made a stencil out of a piece of cardboard. I cut the design into the cardboard with an X-Acto knife. The design is of some sword lilies, the floral motif of the character. When the stencil was ready, I used it to trace the design in an alternating pattern on all the pieces I wanted to paint flowers on. Bodice 2 failed because I'm bad at math. I cannot make my corseted patterns on or fit pieces onto my dress form. The dress form has a modern sculpted bust that doesn't compress like a person's does with a corset on, therefore I had to mostly wing it when I drew the pattern. Backtrack a little, when I made the Hamilton dresses, I would put a zipper right up the center back seam that was already in the pattern, therefore no adjustments had to be made. But for this dress, I wanted to do a front closure. This still has a center back seam, but now also slit open the one-piece center front panel. When I did this, it made the entire bodice about an inch too small for me. I did not realize I'd done something wrong until I tried the bodice on, thinking I finished it, and it barely closed at all. Devastating. I tried to take the front apart to add an extension, but that made the collar pieces too small, and I ended up needing to remake the front entirely. Historically, these front fastening dresses were pinned with straight pins each time the wearer put it on. I don't like the ephemerality of the straight pin method, and I am terrified of losing pins or injuring somebody, so I wanted to do something more permanent. I tried various hooks and eyes, but I couldn't get the smooth closure I wanted. Begrudgingly, I ordered an Old Faithful zipper and hid it beneath a flap in the bodice. I was disproportionately devastated by adding the zipper in because I felt like I ruined the historicity of the dress, even though I'd already sewn the whole thing on a machine. The third bodice, which was thankfully the last one, is bag-lined and looks pretty clean on the inside. I should hope so after 3 tries. If I had to do this a 4th time, which I do not plan on doing anytime soon, I would round out that neckline a little more so the collar sits a little more naturally and shorten up the center back tab. The sleeves are essentially the same pattern as the Eliza Schuyler sleeves I did. However, instead of lace at the edges, I added a cuff. These sleeves could be a bit shorter, but oh well. The design has the character in gloves and sometimes a fichu. I started making the gloves when I realized it wasn't worth all the effort or time, so I thrifted a vintage pair online. It's not too often that 18th century portraits or fashion plates depict gloves, but when they do, they're usually about forearm length and white, probably leather. As for the fichu, this is just a plain white cotton voile one I made. I like to sew a line on the right side of the lining fabric about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam. This tucks the lining away a little better. It's impossible to machine stitch this line all the way around the bodice, but I can get most of it. The skirt is twice as big as one of my white cotton petticoats, so 4 rectangles all stuck together. This is about the point where I realized my previous bodice hoopla meant I needed to order a few more yards of fabric. I told you I would pay for my hubris. This was over $100. The center front of the skirt mimics the petticoat beneath an open rope gown, which is essentially 3/4 of a skirt on top of one whole skirt. But this skirt is all one piece, so the flaps only peel back a maximum of 8 inches before hitting a seam. This is to just save on fabric, and as far as I know, is a completely contemporary creative liberty. The center front and its 2 flappy flaps are angled at the sides. I thought this would help with the way it draped, but I haven't noticed any significant benefit from doing this. I repeated the stencil and painting steps for the center front panel's floral patterning. It was a lot of repetitive work, and when it was finished, it looked like this. I envisioned a very specific horizontal semi-sheer white detailing above the hem of the skirt, which I swear I saw a painting of at some point. I can only describe this feature as the doily garland. When I was looking for the right lace to tack onto the skirt, I came across a lot of customer photos adding doily garlands to their Victorian dresses. So this feature is pretty 19th century from what I've seen. The Victorians loved their doily garlands. I don't think this takes away from the Georgianness of the project though, and if I could find something more scalloped like in those earlier drawings, I would have used that. Tacking the doily garland on was very tedious and probably very inefficient. I could have benefited from one of those right angle rulers at this point. In the end, I ended up with a bunch of pleats. I don't love how this turned out. I actually repleated the skirt since recording this and made all the pleats about 1 inch in size to be more period appropriate. Overall, this was really stressful. I look at this dress and I feel stressed. Hey, that rhymed. I've been working on at least some portion of this dress build since February at least. I've made everything in this costume except for the gloves. Oh, and the cap in the video. I did not make that either. It's been a time. It's been, unfortunately, hundreds of hours, and I hate that for me. It does have a pretty good likeness to the illustration, which I suppose was the biggest challenge and the biggest reward. You can judge for yourself if you like that or not. Thanks for watching. Also, I wanted to let you know, I got a costume design fellowship and I will be building another 18th century dress very soon. That dress will be a robe a l'anglaise court gown, complete with massive grand pannier. I am stoked. Stay tuned. Thanks.